Usually, after completing the value studies, the next logical step is to complete a fully finished sketch using reference that is fairly close in size to the final illustration. I try to make the sketches full size when I can, if the illustration isn't itself too big. If it starts getting bigger, then I'll make the illustration, let's say, 1.5 times larger than the sketch. But I find when you do sketches actual size, you don't run into problems of expansion or reduction or loss of detail when things get larger or smaller. You're better able to anticipate what's going to happen in the final image. In this case, though, I'm going to expedite the process and go directly from my value study to doing color studies. So I have my value study chosen. I chose this one. This is the darker one out of the two. I feel it's more dramatic, maybe better for the storytelling as well. The next step is to choose a few paintings with color schemes that might be appropriate for your illustration. I chose 2 of them. I'm going to have them up on the screen while I'm working. I've decided to try one that is sort of inspired by Rembrandt, in that the color scheme is going to be kind of muted on the warmer side, which I think sort of fits the humorous, warm feel of the story. And then I'm going to choose a Van Gogh. It's a really famous painting called The Red Vineyard, a sunset scene with lots of really dark, really highly saturated colors. So I'm going to try a range of options, one muted, one highly saturated. I've got my color studies sketched in. Notice that I've reduced down the detail from the value study to the color study significantly. The size of the color study, you can make them, let's say, 3 by 4 inches or a little bit smaller. Any smaller than this, I think you're going to start losing the ability to really put detail in the color. Anything larger becomes a lot of work. That's number 1. Number 2, I've simplified the drawing significantly. So I've basically reduced the figures down to blobs. I've picked out some of the major colors, some major areas of color like the hair, the skin tone, the clothes. Do not overcomplicate the drawing. The purpose here is not to do little miniature versions of your paintings. Every artist's process differs a little bit. There's some artists that prefer to do more detailed color studies. There's some artists that don't do color studies at all, or maybe put down a couple of color combinations just in blobs to get the general palette. This is what works for me, something kind of sort of in the middle. So my advice is to keep the drawing relatively simple, but make the color as complicated as you're planning to make it in the final piece. So the first one I'm going to do is the one that's inspired by Rembrandt. It's a very dark, very warm color scheme. By the way, something that's really, really important. Try to choose color schemes with values that reflect your actual value study or your sketch. So I'm going to choose paintings with lots of really dark values, lots of really dark colors. No point in choosing a color scheme that is very light and pastel when your value study has lots of strong shadows, a dark background. That simply wouldn't translate. So I'm going to look for paintings with very dark color schemes in this case, so that I can draw directly from the color scheme into my color study. When you're doing your color study, have the sketch or have the value study in front of you, because you're going to try to choose corresponding colors with corresponding values to your sketch or your value study. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at a painting with a fairly large variety of different kinds of browns and yellows. I'm going to work big to small and mix up a few different colors beforehand. I should probably clean off my palette. Let's do that. It's a good idea to have your colors sort of pre-mixed already and ready to go. That's going to save you time. We're always trying to limit the palette. I think that's important. Let's think about what that palette needs to be. So definitely we've got a lot of burnt umber. And by the way, when you're working with these dry cakes, it helps to wet your colors a little bit a few minutes beforehand. So we're going to have a lot of this burnt sienna color in different values. And then we're also going to have a darker brown, this sepia color. I'm going to put that here. Then, as the room gets a little bit lighter, I'm thinking probably there's going to be a slightly lighter spotlight, which starts going a little bit more yellow ochre. I'm seeing a lot of this yellow ochre color over here. And just to make it a little bit warmer, my warm raw sienna color this way. There's going to be touches of red, so I'm going to borrow a little bit of the red accents in the old lady's cuffs and put them into the king. Alright, so let's start my color study. Mostly I just want you guys to see how much detail I put in. So in terms of drawing, I'm going to keep it really simple. Again, I have the value study in front of me to consult from. I'm going to start off with the background. So the general color back here is probably going to be this. And then as the color goes darker, I'm going to throw a little bit more of this sepia color towards the corner. When you guys are doing color studies, try not to make the colors flat. Try to think about color transition. How is the color moving from one area of the composition to the other? Keep in mind, these color studies are quite small. So if you have a large area of color that isn't moving, isn't changing, that's going to create a really large area of really boring flat color all the way through. Alright, and then I'm going to lighten up this area a little bit. Going this way. Let's see, I think the column I'm going to make a slightly different color. When you have a limited palette, you want to use a large variety of colors within that limitation. So I'm going to try to use a lot of different kinds of browns. The brown here, for instance, is going to be a little bit more kind of sepia gray, a little more neutral colored. The point is, I'm trying to mix my browns or use a variety of browns in this composition to keep things kind of interesting and moving. We've got some burnt sienna colors that are a little bit more on the reddish side. And I'm thinking maybe, just maybe, let's see what this looks like. This column might have a little bit more of this kind of muted red to it. And that the capital of this column might be, let's say, a little bit more yellow. Let's see what that looks like. The main benefit of doing these color studies is that it allows you to take risks. There's actually very little at stake if you mess up the color study, so you inevitably will try unusual color combinations. We talked about unusual, kind of ugly color combinations that you wouldn't otherwise. Quite often, if you choose colors when you're working on the final piece, you'll tend to make much more conservative choices. You'll make choices that you've done before, probably more than once. There are no stakes in here when you're doing these color studies. So as a result, I can try something risky. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'll just try another one. So here I'm going to make the throne kind of a dark brown, a reddish brown. Again, I'm trying to push the variety of color even within my limited palette range. And maybe the throne here is going to be a little more of this raw sienna color. By the way, do you have to be entirely faithful to the original color scheme you're borrowing from? Absolutely not. So you can use it as a starting point, as a source of inspiration. If you're doing your color study and you realize, wait a minute, it might be nice to have some color that doesn't exist in your source material, put it in, see what it looks like. If you fail, then you're going to be forced to make another one. But again, the stakes are really quite low here. And I'm making 2 color studies. My usual process usually consists of making 3. Usually I'll try 2 that I'm kind of certain are going to work, and then I'll try one that's completely crazy, one that I'm not certain, kind of a risky color choice. And quite often, I don't know what the percentages are, the riskier one might surprise you. It might actually work. You never really know until you have all the colors down. Lots of intangibles in this business. Alright, so a color scheme that might be effective in one kind of composition just doesn't work in another one. Okay. Now the other thing I'm paying very close attention to is where the area of focus is in my composition. So for me, the most important part of the composition is the king. The weavers are important too. I'm going to give them a little bit of strength as well. But really, it's the king. So the king is going to have my brightest contrast, my strongest contrast. It's going to have the strongest lights, strongest darks, and it's also going to have the strongest colors. So when you guys are making your value studies, you're keeping the area of focus in mind to make sure that your strongest values are near your area of focus or around it. Now that you're doing color studies, you guys are going to do the same. So we have some strong reds here. I'm going to push this red up a little bit, make it a little bit stronger, maybe a little bit more kind of yellowish. Let's see if it's strong enough. So we're going to have this little patch of red. By the way, don't bother being careful. I recommend deliberately using a big brush for this process so that you don't start tinkering. Tinkering is a giant problem. You start, again, creating a little miniature version of the painting when you really don't need to. Alright, so maybe the king's skin tone is going to be kind of this pale yellow. I'm going to do the same thing for his legs. This way, I'm going to extend the yellow of the throne over here, like this. Let's have a little bit of that pale yellow in his arm. Don't worry if the color leaks. Try to get rid of the white. You're not going to have it in your final painting. Don't have it in your color study. Alright, so let's make some choices for the soldiers. I'm going to give them slightly different colors. Now, even though the color scheme is more or less warm, there are some cools in this painting. There are little touches of gray here and there. So maybe the color of the soldiers has a little bit of gray in it. Again, even though we're dealing with a very limited palette, I still want a variety of colors in there. So maybe for the crown, we're going to have our strongest yellow. So maybe instead of yellow ochre pure, I'm going to add a little bit of gamboge to it. So we have this kind of golden yellow color near his head. Where else? Let's have a little bit of the golden color in his, I don't know what that is, scepter that looks like him. I think that's actually a pretty funny detail, that the scepter has the same head as the king, so the things that amuse me. Okay, so here are the soldiers, the king. We haven't quite decided what color his vest is. Let's see. Okay, not every color on him needs to be absolutely bright. So let's just make it a little bit more kind of like burnt sienna-y. Burnt sienna-y. I know that's not an adjective. Alright, so maybe, just maybe, the throne could have slightly brighter yellows here and here. Alright, let's deal with the heads of the soldiers. I'm going to make them kind of, they're going to be in halftone anyway, so we're more or less shaded. So I'm going to give them slightly warmer skin tones and kind of dark yellow hats. Just to avoid the color from getting, the white from getting distracting, I'm going to fill in these areas. Okay, so our color scheme is coming together. Let's deal with the weavers. So let's make the heads of the weavers kind of ruddy. So this guy is mostly in shadow, like this. And maybe his cloth we're going to make kind of neutral, gray, pretty dark. And his hair as well. Let's give it a little more variety. Let's give it a little bit more yellow. This way. And then his headdress. Okay, we have a ruddy color here. We need something a little bit different. Maybe a yellowish color that's sort of partially in shadow. Okay, possibly these two colors are very close to each other, but look, these are the things that you're working out in your color study. This is one of the purposes of doing a color study. Alright, so this guy I'm going to make a little bit cooler in the dress here, like this, though it could have touches of red in it as well. I just want to make sure that the red here doesn't go quite as strong as anything here, like this. So maybe he's got some kind of multicolored cloth this way. His hair is going to be partially in shadow. He's wearing some kind of cap. Maybe the cap could be some kind of neutral color, kind of a gray like this. And then his skin tone is composed of both shadow and light. So I'm going to choose the general shadow color and then decide what color to make the lighter part of his skin tone, so slightly on the yellowish side like this. Okay, so the color scheme here is almost done. I think probably it needs to have just ever so slightly darker colors towards the corners, right? You can see how dark some of the background is here. So I'm going to fill that in to go a little bit darker, just so that my contrast more closely approximates what's actually there. And then his beard is going to be just about the very darkest thing in my composition. We forgot about his face, didn't we? Okay, here's color study 1. You can see that I've done a lot of work getting color transition, getting color variety. I was trying to avoid putting in a lot of details, so I might do something like this to indicate what the shadow color is inside. But this is enough information for me to take my fully finished sketch and render up a fully finished illustration. Okay, the next one's going to be a little bit trickier. I'm going to try doing something that is also very dark in tone, but much more saturated. So I'm going to use mostly prismatic colors. Let's see how this works. This could end up in disaster, by the way, but I really don't care. I mean, I do care for the sake of this demo, but theoretically, if I'm working on a color study, I don't really mind coming up with something really ugly and atrocious. No one will be able to see it. I'll just throw it out and do another one. All right, so the strategy here is to use a few different kinds of blues, probably a few different kinds of reds, one or two kinds of greens, a large variety, much larger variety of color than we have here, and to, as much as possible, avoid my earth tone colors. So no promises here, absolutely none. Let's see what this possibly might look like. All right, so I'm picking up a little bit of turquoise. No reason to mix several kinds of blues, but yeah, why not? Kind of this turquoisey color in the background. I'm going to knock it down a little bit with alizarin crimson. Again, I'm trying to avoid using earth tones. If I want to create muddy colors, I'm going to use complements to muddy down what I'm seeing. Okay, we're going to have a lot of very bright color almost everywhere. Once again, I kept the drawing very, very simple, and I'm trying to keep the color complex. So when it comes to the lighter value here, I'm starting to add a little bit of green. It's starting to go lighter here. So the wall transitions from this kind of blue to green. Trying to follow the principle of watercolor painting in that I'm working background to foreground, trying to get rid of the big stuff as much as possible, and little by little working towards the detail. So now that we have a much larger variety of color, I can start doing stuff like this. So the ceiling, for instance, might have some little touches of purple in it. Let's see, maybe a little more blue. I'm picking and choosing which colors to use. And by the way, if you're doing an illustration of a landscape, you don't necessarily have to choose a color scheme from a landscape. You can choose the colors from a portrait, for instance. You can take the color of the sky and turn it into skin tone, take the color of a shrub and turn it into the color of a cloth. Absolutely no requirement that you go house for house, sky for sky, tree for tree. Okay, we've got this column here. I'm going to put in, I used an earth tone. I violated my principle. I'm not going to do that to myself. I'm going to use only prismatic colors here and then find ways to mute them down. Okay, did I say I was only going to use prismatic colors? Okay, I lied. I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre. Look, I can easily mix this color, so it's not like I'm cheating or anything. It's just easier to... faster to paint that way. Okay, let's go do the same thing here. So maybe around the king's head we have these kind of touches of green in the background. Going this way, like this, and then heading towards the corners where it needs to go darker. Again, I'm consulting my value study. I should be consulting my final sketch. I'm not. I'm rushing through the process a little bit. Okay, so we've got the background done. I'm kind of liking this so far, but I'm going to hold off judgment. Now for the king, let's see, what should I do? Okay, let's get the color of his hat. We have a couple of different reds, which I like. Maybe the color of his hat could be this kind of slightly cooler red. We've got some bright yellows. Let's put them in his costume. Okay, so here I made the color of the red kind of dark. Well, a little bit of variation is fine, but I'm going to try to stay faithful. Probably I should have chosen a lighter color here when I did that. Okay, and Van Gogh is very, very complicated in terms of color, so there's a lot going on. We've got some turquoisey colors in there as well. So I'm going to see if I can get to approximate some of the color complexity in Van Gogh's mixtures. So it has these combinations of turquoises and really rich golden yellows. That might be really interesting. What else? What else? Okay, well, his beard. And I try to avoid using black as much as possible. So my mixture of sepia and blue usually substitutes for black. I have been known to use black, of course, but you'll find that black is a little bit of a bully. In fact, the black I have on my palette is one of the weaker blacks that you can get. It's ivory black. It's a little bit on the warmer side, very transparent color, really nice, but deliberately kind of on the softer side. Okay, so for the skin tone, we can make him, okay, I'm seeing some kind of relatively bright, kind of almost burnt pinks on his face. His skin tone here, going this way, like this. Okay, for the guards, don't make them too bright. Obviously, you don't want the color on the guards to pull attention away from your area of focus. Don't do that to yourself. This guard could have a slightly different color to him. Drawing simple, color complex, color varied. This is what you're going to draw from to create your final painting. So all of your big color decisions should be made here. Right? Leave absolutely nothing to chance when you actually start working on the final composition. Don't think when you're working on the big painting. Don't think when you're working on the final illustration. All the big decisions should be made beforehand so that you're able to focus on just rendering the thing correctly. There's enough to do. Don't bog yourself up with being forced to make big decisions in the piece. Okay, his throne. I'm going to use some of my golden yellow color here. So he's sitting on some kind of gold throne. I'm trying to stay faithful to the values in my sketch. I'm not always able to do it, but I'm getting close. You can see the values are pretty close. I'm darker here, right, than I am here. But I might tone this down a little bit. All right, so in the stairs in the foreground, we've got this big sloppy mix of colors. Look like this. Maybe they can go a little more red. Again, I'm always thinking about how the color changes, transitions from one spot to the next, the next, the next. Okay, let's deal with our weavers. So this painting is very rich in terms of very dark colors. So the weavers can have all kinds of stuff going on in the shadows. Purples and greens. So we've got a really, really dark green here for his costume. What else for this guy? I'm going to change the color and make it into kind of a dark purple. That's going too dark. It's going to get lost. And now let's deal with his hair. So his hair might be this color, and his headdress might have some touches of red in it. Again, I'm going to try to use saturated colors. I don't want to use anything that's so strong that it pulls attention away from the main part of the story. Make this guy kind of a redhead and make his headdress green. Okay, I lost that color a little bit. Okay, now let's fill in some of the other areas really quickly. Skin tone here. And his skin tone could be kind of golden yellow here as well. Okay, and the shadow color on his face. Okay, so maybe we need to go a little bit darker. Again, I'm trying to get my values to correspond with what's actually there. So this might need to go a little bit darker, though I really like that really bright glowing blue over here. I don't want to lose too much of it. I'm going to try to lose a little bit more of my white, so I can start figuring out what color the shadows are here. We didn't quite get the skin tone here. And then we're going to have little touches of maybe yellow on the lighter part of his skin tone. And then in some of the shadows, maybe even go a little bit green. Alright, so here's my value study. You can see that the color studies more or less pretty closely correspond to the values I have in the value study. The next step is to choose one of these and stay faithful to it. So once you've made your color decisions, don't change them. Try to stay faithful to the color study. What else? Okay, so that's it for now. Once you've done this, you're good to go to proceed to finishing the final illustration.